Good morning.
Andy, I think I need to meditate for an hour.
I don't blame you.
I'm a nervous wreck.
That's okay. You're always a nervous wreck.
No, I'm not. I'm not a nervous wreck.
Oh, okay. So sorry. First of all, Frank, I already showed off. How do you like my T-shirt? Beethoven with a mask.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay.
I love it. Beautiful.
Great. My self-esteem is in check now. Anyway, everybody, welcome. We're so happy to have the legendary Franklin Cohen here. I always like to talk about how we met, but I'd like to just start with how I first heard his name. We both grew up in Westchester County, which is a suburb of New York City. And, you know, as a kid, you just heard about Frank Cohen. All the band directors always talked about it. We do it. Look at he's completely bewildered. You know, they talk about the Munich competition. He was the only person to ever get the first prize. He'd be trying for Allstate or whatever. And everyone said, yeah, but the way he played the Mozart and the Munich competition, everything else. And so he, you know, he was already a legend. And we met a few times in Manhattan early on. You come to town with the Cleveland Orchestra. Remember Mike Contaxis, your student?
Yes.
You know, he had, after Rushinoff had his kind of Clarinet Central clarinet store, Mike took over, and he had his Clarinet Central clarinet store, and we'd go to hear you and, you know, go out afterwards. And I remember once we actually went out with Harris Goldsmith.
Yes.
Yeah, and Harris, of course, is the pianist in Harold Wright's Brahms Sonata recordings. And I remember as a kid at Juilliard, I dragged you up to a party. I know you don't remember any of this, but I dragged you up to a party. Okay. I'm going to start lying and really embarrassing you about what didn't happen. No, and so that was fantastic. And I just want to say something. The Europeans, when the orchestras go out on stage, they often come out as one group. They don't warm up. But as a kid, I was an usher in Carnegie Hall. And I remember so many times the Cleveland Orchestra would come and you'd be out there warming up. And that was the highlight of my day. It was more important than the concert. I'd walk right up, the head usher would be scolding me. I'd walk right to the stage and just hear you play your licks. And to this day, we in the Hong Kong Philharmonic, sometimes we go back and forth. Should we do a European style? Should we do American style? And I always say, the most exciting part for me as a kid growing up was listening to warming up. And I specifically remember, you know, doing that with you. So anyway, you used to come to Hong Kong a lot. We had so many great times. I did a masterclass at Oberlin 20 years ago. I went to visit the home. So, you know, I mean, I'm just so happy you're here, and we're just going to start firing in all cylinders.
Can I just say, Andy, thank you for inviting me. I've really loved the sessions I've watched so far with my esteemed colleagues. They're all great. And this must be fun for so many people, if it was that much fun for me. So you're great at what you're doing, and God bless, keep going.
Great. Okay. Well, you know, Lorenzo started this as a fun thing and a suggestion. And then he said, you know, this could be really educational. In 50 years, people might be interested in what these great players, you know, and teachers and everything else had to say. Imagine if we could go back and hear Mulfeld or people like that on tape, so to speak. So, you know, I'm going to start taking it a little bit more seriously. I hope you don't mind. So anyway, the first thing I really like to do, especially with the guys who've had long careers, is start paying a little bit of homage to the old guys, you know, again, linking us back. So the first thing we got to do is talk about your teachers, okay? Because I'm actually connected with them. So why don't we just discuss that as a kid in Westchester County? How did you get started?
Well, my mom was a neighborhood piano teacher, dealing with all the dysfunctional kids of the neighborhood. And so she started to teach me the piano when I was, I don't know, 6 or 7. And we went for a few years, you know, we were limping along. And one day, you know, I was holding my hand in a certain way, and she just lightly tapped me on the wrist. And I said, "Mom, you hit me." I don't want piano lessons anymore. actually, that was the official end of my piano lessons. But that afternoon, because my mom knew that I loved music, I used to lie underneath the piano as she practiced every day, almost all day long. When I was free at home and my mom was playing, I would be lying on the living room floor listening to her play. And that's where my love affair with music really started. So she knew I loved music. And if I didn't want to study with piano with her, she said, okay, Frank, here's my idea. Let's go to the local music store this afternoon. Okay, let's go. So I got in the car, we drove to the music store, and there's this poor salesman behind the counter, with a mother and a child, and he says, what can I do for you? And my mom says, well, I was teaching him music and he quit, so we need to find another instrument other than the piano. Okay. So he brought out about 5 or 6 instruments. I don't remember. There might have been a trumpet, an oboe, a clarinet, a flute. And I just picked each one up and tried, I blew where I thought you should blow. And on the clarinet, a squeak eventually came. And I said, okay, I'll play that one. Not like I've heard other people, they heard the sound of the clarinet and it was an immediate love affair. I just said, okay, this was my default. It makes a sound, I'll go with it. So we brought it home, and the rest is history. It's been my partner for how many years since then? I'll be 74 in a month. So it's been with me since the age of like 8 or 9.
Wonderful, right?
A long time.
So who was your first lesson with?
Anyway, there was a little school orchestra, and there was a music class. And my mom called the teacher there, who was a double bass player, and said, do you know anything about the clarinet? And he said, not very much, but I think I could teach your son. So I started studying with him. And for a year and a half, 2 years, I was playing, upside down. He didn't know which hand goes on top. So I started with him, and eventually I think she realized that this was not going to lead anywhere substantive. So she started calling around and found a music school in New York City. I guess it's quite well known, called the Turtle Bay Music School. And they had a clarinet teacher that they recommended. So my mom called this man. His name was Aaron Garodner. And my mom says, we live in White Plains. Would you be willing to come up and give my son lessons? So he said, well, I live in Long Island. It's a long trip. If you get me some more students, I think the trip would be worth it. So then my brother started playing. And then we got a neighbor down the street to play. And I think we had 3 or 4 people who would take lessons on a Saturday morning. Well, so Mr. Garodner came from, I think, somewhere in mid-Long Island. And we met him. He was a short, lovely, I think he was of German descent or Polish. And he came to the house, and he wrapped his mouthpiece, with the string. He played old stuff. And so I took lessons with him, and the highlight was always playing duets at the end. And I remember there'd be saliva coming out the corners of his mouth. And, my brother and I would laugh about it. Well, anyway, long story short, years later, after I had come to Cleveland, I was practicing one day in the George Sell Library, which is the repository for all of his scores and parts that he meticulously marked so that everything would be unified. And I came across a book that said Principal Players of the Cleveland Orchestra. So I'm leafing through this book, and whose name comes up? Aaron Garodner.
Wow.
Yeah, so I start reading. He had been principal clarinet in Cleveland in 1931.
Wow.
For 1 season.
Wow.
And I don't know why he left, whether he was fired or he quit or he didn't like Cleveland. But in any case, I thought, wow, if I had only known this at the time and could have sort of followed that train of thought. Anyway, he was my first teacher. After I got a little bit better, my mom, she didn't know his history. She says, why don't I call someone local who has a connection to a big organization like the Metropolitan Opera. So my second teacher, legitimate teacher, was Ben Armando, who you know.
Yeah, he's like he was a second father to me, and I'm so happy you're paying tribute to him.
Ben was great. So here, I don't know how old I was then, maybe 13. And I would go to, my mom would drive me to Benny's house. And Benny was always singing, and he was in love with music, you know. And he'd be, you know, and I'm sitting there like 13-year-old kid. I didn't know that much about music. Actually, I never did. But I said to my mom, what's he doing? and then he gave me a Brahms sonata. I mean, I was way too young. So we came back the next week, and meantime, I had been rehearsing with my mom. And he says, what do you think, Frank? I said, I don't know. I don't like this music.
And my mother, you got high standards, man.
My mom says, how do you deal with this? I can't believe it. And I said, yeah, I can't relate to this, you know, da, 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 da. And he goes, da, da, zi, da, da. Anyway, so I studied with Benny for about 2 years. And I have to say, an issue I've had my entire life, and I've become more and more aware as time has gone on, that I had pretty severe ADD. So I didn't practice that much. I didn't focus that much. And as a teacher, I drove poor Benny to drink, I think.
Well, by the way, your brother continued to study with Ben as well. Your mother Ben told me that.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't really remember. I don't remember that actually.
Okay.
In any case, Benny one day announced in our lesson, Mrs. Cohen, I've decided, this has been very difficult for me because Frank, I think, is a very talented kid. I can't teach him anymore. And my mom looks at him like, what are you talking about? He says, I can't teach him anymore because he doesn't practice. You know, I tell him to study this, learn that, and it's always the same. She says, and I've decided, I mulled this over in my mind, this is going to be our last lesson. So my mom says, okay, Benny, what do we do now? And he says, I only know one person in this area that I would say you should call. And that his name is Leon Rushinoff. And he was in New York City. So my mom called him. She was very upset with me because Benny threw me out. And she called Leon, and I'm all signed up. But now, after high school on Friday, she has to drive me to New York City, which is a much bigger trip. And she says, look what you've done now, Frank. You've created you got thrown out. You know, lessons with Benny were $5 an hour. Now Leon is $10 an hour, and we have to schlep to New York. So I go to my first lesson with Leon. Leon was, I mean, it's like I met my second father. You know, he was so warm, and immediately I loved this guy. He had just lost his first wife.
Yes.
So there was a little bit of a sadness there, but when I walked through the room, his eyes would always light up and treat me as if I had practiced, you know, 10 hours a day, and that I was producing for him. So anyway, I studied with Benny just short of 2 years in high school, and then I graduated. My mom was a little put off because she would come with me. She parked the car. We'd walk in. His studio was on Broadway, and it happened to be a building which on the 5th floor had a bunch of hookers.
Right. He'd always say, son, if you ever really want to get warmed up, go across the street. You know, that the neighborhood wasn't that
My mom told me, she said, how can you have a studio in such an awful building? I don't want my son. Anyway, it was a great time, and he was wonderful. When it came time actually to make a decision whether I wanted to go to a college or go to a music school. My brother, who was 4 years older, was a brilliant mind, and he went to Yale and Johns Hopkins. And I said, this is not for me. I can't do this. So my mom says, well, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know, maybe I'll go to music school. She says, music school? Okay. So I went to the guidance counselor at White Plains High School, and I said, I'm interested in music. What do you think I should do? And she says, I think you should apply to the Baldwin Wallace Conservatory, which is actually in Ohio.
That's right, near you.
And so I went home and I said to my mom, I said, the guidance counselor says I should apply to Baldwin Wallace because my grades aren't fabulous. It'd probably be a good fit. So she said, Baldwin what? I said, Baldwin Wallace. She says, you're not applying there. I never heard of it. So anyway, eventually I applied to Juilliard. And I have to tell a little story about my audition. Do I have time to tell a story?
Oh, no, go, listen.
So I went to the audition, and my mom was my accompanist, you know. In fact, every evening she would come to me. She says, Frank, how'd you like to play? And I usually, that was the highlight of my day. I said, sure, let's play. So we would read out of the 16 grand solo books, you know, the big French solo. Yeah. And anyway, she played for my audition at Juilliard, which I remember very vividly. We went in the room. There's a panel of about 7 people sitting there. And I think we played Mozart and Nielsen. And my mom, on the piano, the wooden part, she did this, you know, the snare drum part, and it was very cute. And she did the best she could. And after my audition was over, someone came, because I didn't know them then. It might have been Portnoy or Joe Allard, and they said, well, Frank, you sounded really good. Just, your mother is definitely accepted to school. We'll have to decide about you. And I think she, you know, she said, I'm too old. So I began my schooling at Juilliard. I forgot to say, I probably should have stayed with Rushanov, but he was teaching at that time at the Mannes College of Music, which is a fine school, but my mom thought, you know, Juilliard is a bigger school. So
Leon used to say that basically people were moonlighting with him from Juilliard. So everyone was taking lessons on the side. So he went to Juilliard finally and said, listen, all your students are studying with me anyway. Why don't you hire me? So well, you were right at the bridge.
I wanted to continue. Anyway, I ended up going to Juilliard. He wasn't there. And I think he was a bit heartbroken because we actually had a beautiful relationship, and he saw some talent at the time. So I went to Juilliard and I had some, you know, wonderful colleagues there in the clarinet department and the string department and piano department. After a year of study there, I felt confused. You know, you said Leon was moonlighting. I went back to Leon actually to say, I don't know if I'm doing anything right. And he said, well, let me hear you play. And he said, what's going on, Frank? And I said, I don't know. What's going on? You tell me. And I said, people are talking about this, embouchure, and the breathing. He says, you know, Frank, we didn't talk about any of that stuff. Just play. So he says, if you promise to come back next week, I'm going to give you a Yedel etude. And he says, you're not going to have time to worry about anything else other than learning the notes. Well, he did that. I came back, and I sounded better. But I was enrolled at Juilliard, so I stayed there for a year. And then, actually, I don't know how this happened. I applied to Curtis.
Wait, sorry, did you say who was your teacher at Juilliard?
Oh, my teacher at Juilliard was Bernard Portnoy.
Okay, and then didn't you, I'm probably screwing it all up, you did study with Drucker at one point, right? Or is that later in the story? Or do I have it wrong?
Later. It's when Juilliard moved down to Lincoln Center opened in what, 1969?
Right. So those of you that don't know, Juilliard used to be where the Manhattan School of Music is, uptown, and then moved down to Lincoln Center.
Right.
at one point. By the way, so, and do you remember some of your clarinet cronies? Was Eddie Daniels there with you,
Yeah,
for
Eddie was
example?
there. He was.
Anybody else I might know, or our viewers might know?
Oh my gosh. I know some of the names. I don't know if you would know them.
Okay, but
John Moses, Merlin Petroff.
uh, great.
Fine. But so so I'm at Juilliard, and the conductor of the orchestra was a French conductor, and every year the students were required to audition for him. Well, I was never picked to be in the orchestra, which I thought was unfortunate because I didn't know then I wanted to be an orchestra player, but I did love the music, and I grew up listening to all the great symphonic literature in my home. So he never chose me, and well, actually, in the meantime, I took a few solo competitions. I thought, you know what, orchestra, okay, they don't want to choose me. I'm gonna try. I'll take a few solo competitions. I did some local ones in New York. I did quite well. Then I went to the Geneva competition in 1967. My ADD is following me around. And I didn't, I worked reasonably hard, but didn't really dedicate myself. And I thought I played fairly well in Geneva. And I was bumped out in the first round, as was my French colleague, Michel Arignon, who also was he's a fantastic player. And he liked the way I sounded. I liked the way he sounded. He invited me to Paris for a week. That story goes on and on. But anyway, I went home. And I thought, if I'm going to do this competition thing again, I better work a little bit harder and take it more seriously. So the next summer, I saw, well, Munich was coming up the next year. And I decided to stay at home that summer, exercise and rehearse with my mom every day for 2-3 hours. And I felt really well prepared this time. I go to Munich, 1968, and lo and behold, I make it through the rounds and I get to the end and I win first prize. And this was something way beyond what I ever thought would happen because I went for a good time. After the final round, a manager comes up to me and he says, "Mr. Cohen, I am someone Winterstein. I run a concert agency. I would be very interested in managing you as a soloist." So someone said, "You know who you were talking to?" And I said, "No, I just met him." He said, "This is the biggest manager in Europe." And I go to his office, he signs me up, and there are names like Fischer Dieskau, Isaac Stern, Rubinstein, Horowitz, Rostropovich, Franklin Cohen. I couldn't believe, I was too young even to realize.
How old were you?
I was 22.
Wow. And sorry, just before you go on, wasn't the late great Jessie Norman also a first prize winner the same year?
She was. What I was going to say about this was something that changed my life, actually, forever. We were preparing for the rehearsal of the prize winners at the prize winners concert. Jessie, at the rehearsal, sang Wesendonck Lieder, and I played Mozart Concerto. So I'm in the hall listening to her rehearse, waiting to be called, as next person on the rehearsal schedule. And I'm hearing this woman who I'd come to know through our times in the cafeteria during the week throughout the competition. And she starts to sing, and I'm weeping. I never heard anything like that. And I went up to her, I gave her a big hug, we were already pretty friendly, and I said, "Jessie, I never heard anything as beautiful as that in my life." And she said, "Oh, don't be silly." She was very, very modest, shy, modest girl I think she was from Atlanta, South. And that changed my life and I say that because after hearing these sounds coming out of this person's body, I always wanted to be able to make sounds like that would have that carrying power this incredible projection that, you know, only the human voice can really get. And you know, I in trying to search ways to find that throughout my career, I went off the beaten path many times. Probably made a lot of mistakes, you know, according to what's correct and what's not correct. But I always wanted to sound like Jesse sounded that day. And what I said to her, I said, Jesse, when I hear you, it feels like I bought my clarinet at a toy store. You know, and I want to play a real instrument. So, you know, I mean, my search has gone on since that day. The rest of it continues to go on, even though, you know, I'm not as active as I was. But that ability to take up a space and fill every molecule of air, and that, you know, regardless of the size of the space, sound has been my dream, and it's something I've tried to do, and I've held. Anyway, I'm talking too much, Andy.
No, not at all. I just want to share also maybe my second year here. We opened our hall where you came to play later, and one of the opening concerts was with Jesse Norman as soloist, and it was really funny. She was extremely picky, let's say, and it was blistering hot. And she said, "I'm sorry, all aircon has to be off." Okay. And I'll never forget, here you were, you know, in Asia, and she does Amazing Grace a cappella. And you've got, and this was, you know, pre-handover, and you've got all these British people in the orchestra, and they're all fanning themselves with the program. And she turns around just a little bit to the orchestra. I don't know whether it was a figment of my imagination, but I remember 31 years later, I felt like the centrifugal force was pushing me back in my chair. It was absolutely memorable. You know, it was you know, really memorable. I mean, that was 31 years ago or something like that. I also want to ask you, I mean, talking about your search, am I wrong in saying I used to see you in Carnegie Hall working on mouthpieces between pieces, and I mean, not reeds, which already, I mean, a guy like me, it's like, you know, everything, oh no, this is the reed that I played in the dress rehearsal, I can't change it, you know, but you're sitting there, oh yeah, let me take this mouthpiece during a break, you'd work on it, put it back on with the reed, and say, oh, you know, it's only Carnegie Hall, it's only, you know, Pines of Rome in about a minute, you know.
Yeah, you know, I mean, this is my great, what I've been obsessed with is the sound of the moment. And if I'm not happy, I don't know what else to do. It's an act of desperation, and it's craziness. And thank God I haven't done that for years. But yeah, I was desperate to sound perfect in that moment for what the moment required. You know, it's like when people talk about sound, like I have a friend who's obsessed. He says, oh, your sound. I said, it's not about the sound. It's about this, you know, it's like the soup du jour, the sound of the day, the sound of the moment, you know, because one moment's sound is completely different from the next moment's sound. It's not like you have your sound and every time you play, that's what we hear. It's what I got, you know, from Jessie or other great musicians. You know, she'll go, oh, or, I mean, it's the same, you know, she hasn't changed her mouthpiece. It's like what we have to do. We have to be able to, I mean, not we. I wanted myself to be able to do that. You know, I didn't want my, you know, if I made a beautiful sound, it to sound like that all the time. Because it's not, I feel it's not the requirement of the moment musically, you know. If you're playing Brahms Sonata in your living room, it's different sound than if you're playing, you know, Wagner or Strauss in Carnegie Hall, and you're competing with the horns and the trombones, and you want the clarinet to soar above the whole group. And I wanted that ability. You know, I didn't want to look at a conductor in a large piece and the conductor be going, let's see, more. You know, I liked it when I got this, you know. and so, you know, you can always react to that. But when you're desperate to make more sound and you can't, actually most conductors don't ask that anyway, but some do, and actually, I didn't care what they asked me. I knew what I wanted to produce. This goes back to my first experience in a real professional orchestra, was within the American Symphony in, let's see, it was in the middle of my jewelry. It was actually after Munich, so it probably would have been 1969. I auditioned for Leopold Stakovsky, who was then the conductor of the American Symphony. And of course, we all had heard of Stakovsky. And if you see a photo of him, it's like, wow, it's impressive. These long hands and this beautiful face. So I had an audition scheduled in his apartment, which was on Central Park East.
Wow.
No, so it's Fifth Avenue, basically. So I go to the doorman lets me in. Oh, you're here to see Maestro Stakovsky. This building is fabulous. The doorman had the white gloves on. I go upstairs to play for the maestro. He opens the door, and wow, I saw his face, and I felt great. Like, wow, this is great. This is greatness. I mean, just looking at him and hearing about what he had done. So I went into his studio. I played my audition, which lasted about 40 minutes, and then we talked a little bit. Went home. I was told that evening that he wanted me to be principal clarinet in the American Symphony, and that the rehearsal was like next Monday or Tuesday. And it was a big program, and I had almost no experience in orchestra. So all the music was new to me. I think we were doing Shostakovich's first symphony, who has a lot of clarinet. And I show up at Carnegie Hall, where all of the rehearsals were. And midway through the rehearsal, I get a assistant conductor comes to me and says, "The maestro would like to see you." So I go back to his room, and he says, "Frank, do you remember the way you played in my apartment?" I said, "Yeah, I think so." He says, "You keep looking at me like you're trying to, do something for me." He said, "No, I hired you so you could be happy doing your thing." He says, "Because somebody with the instinct and the musicianship that you have is not going to be happy following me or anybody else." He says, "I want to follow you when you take over the stage."
Mm.
He says, "If you make yourself happy, believe it, Frank, I'll be happy." And I'll tell you, I never forgot those words. And he's right in a way. If you are a musician with strong, passionate feelings, of course you have to fit into the group. But a conductor wants to hear, when you go to the rehearsal, they want to hear who you are. If they're good, if they're confident. Because you'll only add, to the floor, to the space. I mean, what coach wouldn't be thrilled to have LeBron James on the team doing his thing? Yes, you have to be a team player. But he says, "No, Frank, you need, if you're going to play an orchestra, you need to be Frank Cohen." Because that's what I really fell in love with when I heard it in my apartment. I walked out on stage. He had given me the gift of power. I never forgot it. And he was smiling at me from that day onward. It was a beautiful thing. And then I sort of got to know his work later on. And even now, if I put on an old recording of Stakovsky, I hear this incredible personality and this uniqueness of what he offered the orchestral world. It was quite extraordinary. He even thought that the solo voices were so important, the woodwinds, that he had us sitting next to the conductor's podium, facing the audience. You can imagine it. I mean, he wanted our voices to just shoot out into the hall. And I think I got pretty good at that. and it's, so the Jesse Norman thing, the Stakovsky thing, I mean, and these were experiences that were inviting me to open out my voice to the world. And I always felt it a challenge to do that. in chamber music. I did a lot of soloing with the Cleveland Orchestra as well as orchestras in Germany. And that's where my comfort zone was, actually. You know, showing who I was, not trying to fit into some mold that some others might have for you, you know, this perfect little Madonna in the frame. No, he wanted you to break loose. And that's what I've always tried to do as a musician, but within the context that I was surrounded by. If it's chamber music, no, don't dominate the string quartet, but be a personality and invite everyone else in the group to be themselves too. And then we figure out how we do the dance together. It's a dance.
You know, I've worked with a lot of his assistant conductors, and they always take the pride, you know, they learned how to get that sound from the orchestra. He had his own sound that he could get from the orchestra, and I guess it was part of what you're talking about. A lot of it, I'm sure, was the selection of you. I mean, that's the whole thing. He wanted you to be you based on the fact that he heard you playing, and he just loved, you know, what it was.
Yeah, but his gestures were like that. You know, it's and the thing I will never forget, actually, and it's very apropos of the times now. You remember the Kent State shooting, the National Guard going to Kent State. So the killing happened, and that afternoon or later, early in the evening, I got a phone call from Mr. Stakovsky. He says, "Frank, this is Leopold Stakovsky." And I thought, you got to be kidding. Why are you calling? He says, "You know, this terrible shooting that happens." He says, "Tomorrow morning, I want you to call all the clarinets and tell them we need to be in Carnegie Hall, 10 o'clock. We're doing a in memoriam concert for the students that were killed, and the music will be on the stand. I'm asking you to call the clarinets." And he called each principal, and we were there in Carnegie Hall the next morning. And on our stand was all of this beautiful Bach and other things that he arranged that was sort of somber and dark and beautiful. And we played this concert. There was not a dry eye in the house. And he spoke so beautifully to the audience about the tragedy of this event and how could we allow this to happen in this country. And the people left, you know, having been given this gift by Stakovsky and the orchestra. And it was a beautiful gesture. And I think the healing that brought is probably healing we need now.
Oh.
Whatever kind of healing. But I remember that because it was very, very, very special. Anyway, from the, you know, so concurrently with my job with the American Symphony, I had this manager in Germany, and I was playing all of these solo concerts, which I was loving. And that's when Juilliard moved to Lincoln Center, and that's when my study, that's when I started studying with Stanley Drucker. I was hardly in school because I was mostly in Germany, but when I was home, I would show up to my lessons, and I thought, wow, Stanley Drucker, you know, the great Stanley Drucker, this was fantastic. Oh, I have another story about Stanley. Can I tell that? It goes back to when I was very young.
Please, please. This is what it's all about, man.
So I was studying, I think I was studying with Ben Armato at the time, and I was preparing the Debussy Rhapsody. And my mom noticed that Stanley Drucker was soloing with the New York Philharmonic in a building called the County Center in Westchester County. And Stanley Drucker was to be soloist. So I had my music, you know, the old French edition, which took up two music stands. And I practiced from it. And we went backstage. I went backstage. My mom says, "Let's go meet Mr. Drucker." And there he was, you know, larger than life. And here I was like 13 years old. And it was like the greatest thing. I said, "Mr. Drucker, that was great. Can you sign my music?" So I got my Debussy out. He signed my Debussy Rhapsody. You know, Stanley Drucker, bigger than life. Took up half the music. And what happened then is in my practicing the piece over the years, I had a parakeet. We had a pet parakeet who would sit on my music stand. And over the course of the next few years at home, the parakeet would chew on the corners of the music. So I to this day, I have my edition with Stanley's name on it, with the parakeet, chewed off the corner. Anyway, I'm just now.
Wait, Frank, I just have to interrupt you. I haven't moved. You see, I haven't moved. What's on my stand? I'm doing the Crilliano Concerto here in a couple of years, and look who signed it. Stanley Drucker. So I get it.
I mean, we all have so much to thank Stanley for. He was the first in so many things, especially these great big works like that. I remember hearing the world premiere of that.
1977?
Yeah. This was the year after I won Munich. I was just still in Juilliard. And I mean, I couldn't believe what hit me.
Yeah.
Of course, later I wanted to play in Cleveland, and I did. And actually, John Corigliano came to the performance, which was conducted by Lenny Slatkin. And I was very happy with the performance, except I said, no, I can't play the opening. And Corigliano said, Frank, you're trying to play it too fast. But I remember the way Stanley played it, and I couldn't do it. So anyway, that was one of the highlights of my career, playing that piece, with John here. And the thing that I remember about my lessons with Stanley, I'm going all over the place. You have to forgive me.
It's okay. It's your ADD, man. That's why we love you.
It is. I'm all over. I say one thing and then I go back 10 years.
It's okay.
It's not like I really studied with Stanley, but being in the room with him, he would play as much as I would. And he'd always ask me what I was playing, and we'd talk about it. He'd pick up my clarinet, play a little bit of, on my reed. And he said, how do you play this thing? I feel like a horse. He says, it's too hard. I said, I don't know. That's what I was playing. So anyway, we'd laugh about that. And then Stanley would usually say, he says, Frank, are you hungry? And I said, Stanley, I'm always hungry. He says, let's get some to eat. He says, I have a concert in 2 hours and you're the last lesson. So let's get a little bite. I'd play for 15, 20 minutes. He would play, I would play. But the energy that he exuded in the room, was wonderful for me as a kid, because I wanted to bring his energy to the stage, always with me. The energy that Stanley had, the energy that Leon had, that smiling. And actually, those are the most significant years.
Well, Frank, let's say, I just want to give there's too many people as usual, but some shout outs of some of your fans are there. I need to mention Pascual Martinez Forteza, because he's in the New York Philharmonic and he sat next to Stanley Drucker for a few years. So and he's been wonderful. He's been supporting a lot of the shows. Of course, our extremely dear friend John Brussier. He's always the first one here writing messages. How come you're late? I set my alarm clock, So he sends his love, and you would blush if you heard all the nice things he's saying about you. So I'm not going to tell you, but he thinks you belong right up there with all those legends of the management in Germany. And I take full credit. I understand you made friends with Michael Drapkin the other day. I put you guys together. You had a 2-hour conversation. And then he sent me a message, said, Andy, I had the most fascinating conversation with Frank Cohen. These are the questions that I want you to ask him.
Okay.
So he's here. We have we have Greg Radin, the principal of Dallas, who grew up in Westchester. So we all grew up in Westchester. So, we've got all kinds of people. I can't name them out, but thank you everyone for listening to what this legend has to talk about from, I don't know how, decades back.
It's funny talking about legends, because today people listen to recordings, right? I never enjoyed that process. I never enjoyed the process because what I was lacking, and maybe it's my lack of confidence, I never liked, as Ashkenazi used to tell me, he says, Frank, you're one of the artists that I know that does not like to look at himself in the mirror. And so I didn't make many recordings. A lot of the things that my best playing are private recordings. Anyway, so that's interesting to say too, because I would try to make a recording and then I'd hear it, I'd say, no, I don't want it. I was making a recording.
Look, I'm going to be as bad as you now. I'm going to jump around because I know a lot of I've known you forever. Let's talk about Ashkenazi, okay? You have a recording, okay? Both Brahms sonatas and the Schumann fantasy pieces, is that right?
That's right.
Okay, so there's all kinds of background connected with that and your relationship with him and the recording. Just talk about that for a second.
Well, when he asked me to do this, of course I was flattered. I mean, I think the Cleveland Orchestra sounded incredible under him. And he had this great musicianship and energy. And he says, would you like to record the Brahms sonatas? And I said, are you kidding? I would love that. So he said, okay, well, we have a recording scheduled next season. But here's the way it's going to go. It's going to be difficult. We have all the Brahms symphonies to record over like 2 days, as well as the arrangement of the Brahms Handel variations. So Frank, we're going to do the orchestra recordings in the afternoon. And you and I are going to stay late, like 1, 2, 3 in the morning, and we'll play the Brahms. And he says, and Frank, I'm only getting to Cleveland just before, so we're not going to be able to rehearse. So I'm thinking, yeah. I want to rehearse. I want to enjoy this time. So it was, as he said, we recorded Brahms symphonies all day long. We got dinner, and then we talked for a while, and maybe played for half an hour. And then we went back to this humongous hall downtown Cleveland called the Masonic Auditorium, and we recorded till 3, 4 in the morning, and we were both exhausted. And I think I went back to listen, and I said, I don't like it. And he says, let's just play. And so the whole idea of making recordings and playing with Ashkenazi, because when he made his own solo recordings, he had consummate control. He was a big shot. He could tell him, I don't like this, I don't like that. We had no time to do that. I had no time to react. And what came out, came out. And some people really like it. And they say, it's my favorite recording. But for me, as I said, I didn't want to look at myself in the mirror. So if you like it, I'm happy. But
well, Frank, let's talk. How about recordings in the orchestra? Are they? How long were you principal of Cleveland Orchestra? 48 years or something like that?
No, 40 years.
40 years, and then 8 years in Baltimore, maybe, or something. Do I have that?
Not that long.
Okay. So I don't even know how many recordings you might have done in the orchestra and in front of the orchestra, but what pops out in your mind? First of all, how the orchestra sounded, and a very self-critical guy like you hates looking himself in the mirror. Maybe out of all those recordings, there's 1 or 2 that you thought, oh yeah, this is okay. If you want to hear me at my best in the orchestra, these are the recordings to buy.
Interestingly enough, so we would record downtown Cleveland in this beautiful space, and I would go back to the control room and listen occasionally. Because I wanted to know, if I'm coming through, and I was never really that happy, so I did that on a limited basis. And then the record would come out, and many of them I did not buy, but I'd hear some on the radio later, and I said, wow, that sounds really good. What's happening now is I'm going back, and I'm getting all these old recordings, and they're listed on YouTube. They're not video, obviously. The other day, I brought up Beethoven Ninth Symphony with Duchman, and I put it on as a YouTube link, and I listened with my headphones, and I thought, wow, this is so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Why was I so removed from it then? So I'm going back now. People don't listen to CDs anymore. It's not something people do. But so I'm going back on YouTube, digging up a lot of these old moments, with the Cleveland Orchestra. I have to go back. So when I entered the orchestra, it was with Lauren Mozell, 1970.
Okay, wait. If we're gonna play this, we're having tug of war here. So let's go. Wait, hold on. It's my turn. My turn. Okay. Behave yourself, man. Okay.
I'm trying.
So, okay. So we're back in New York, okay? And you were going to Germany, and you were going to Juilliard, and you were studying with Stanley 20 minutes and then going out to eat with him, okay?
Yeah.
Now, so, okay, let's start from there. I mean, we've got a little while to go before the beginning of Cleveland, right? So let's do this. Okay.
The transition is basically I was spending a lot of time in Germany. I had friends and beautiful friends and management, and it looked as if I would spend my career mostly living in Germany, making a life there. My mom was heartbroken. She would always say to me, "Frank, why do you have to go to Germany to play?" She says, "Look at your friend Garrick Olson, who also was from White Plains. Know that name?"
Oh, yeah, pianist, of course.
Yeah,
Brings
the
his
great
own piano to Hong Kong.
play in New York. Why do you have to go? Because she could see that life was pulling me there. Relationships, this and that, friendships. And my brother was also ill. He had been ill since childhood. And I just felt like my mother was telling me, and without telling me, that she was going to be heartbroken, losing her son to Germany and Europe, playing there. I think in many ways, professionally, it would have been the most logical trajectory for me. And I could easily have done it. I was loving it. But I decided then to just give it up. And I don't know, I decided to give.
Sorry, Frank. I'm curious because first of all, I mean, this was the 1960s, and let's be honest. I mean, what a solo clarinet career in those days. It's hard enough in these days, but you're going back, half a century or something, and you were really doing it. First of all, were you doing it? I know it was a Munich competition. You mentioned Europe. I mean, what percentage was in Germany, and what percentage was outside of Germany within Europe?
Most of it was Germany and Austria and Switzerland occasionally.
Okay.
But it was getting me gigs. I played with all the big German orchestras, I say, with the exception of the Berlin Philharmonic. Played with the Bayerische Rundfunk, the Hamburg Symphony, Stuttgart, Dusseldorf, all these places. And there are many smaller orchestras there that sound very good. And was making good fees at the time. And I had a life, actually, Andy, that I didn't appreciate because I wasn't going for that. It sort of fell into my life, into my lap. And I didn't really know what to do with it, except what turning point was when my mother told me her dissatisfaction of losing me. And we were a beautiful family, and I love my brother, I love my parents. And I said, I have to stop. So I gave everything up there. I told the management that I was trying to make a career in the States, and I saw an audition for an orchestra. Otherwise, before, I had really no desire to do that except for Stakovsky. So I took this audition. I won it for the Baltimore Symphony, and I moved to Baltimore. Now, this is a very hard period of my life. I was happy in Germany playing solo all the time. And then going to the Baltimore Symphony, which was actually a very good orchestra. But the schedule was awful at the time, playing children's concerts all over the city. It's like Ricardo said that the Orlando Symphony was wonderful. They were wonderful, but the schedule wasn't serious. So I went there, and I wasn't all that happy. I was happy with some of my colleagues. And in the meantime, I met my wife-to-be. We got married. And I expressed my unhappiness, and she said, "Well, why don't we all pick up and go back to Europe?" And so we were considering that, and then this opportunity came in Cleveland. And I thought, well, I've never been part of world-class, great orchestra, so I'll go there. When I came to Cleveland, I told them, I said, I had a solo career. I was going to go back. I want to play a lot of solos. So I'm making this my solo home, and and I'm making that sacrifice. If you can keep me happy with enough to do here as a soloist, let's do it.
But actually, you didn't have success the first time you auditioned for Cleveland.
No, I didn't actually.
So there's a story connect. It opened up again, and you didn't get invited, or you were trying to get invited, or something.
You've dug up.
You know, no, you don't remember. We've discussed about 3 times, like 30 years ago, man. Come on, man.
So actually, when I was in Baltimore, unhappy, they had an audition here, and as it went, I got it. Oh no, I showed up. I had planned to come. I came to the audition. I thought I played quite well, and Loren Mozart was the director. He came right up to the stage and he said, "Listen," like he's giving me a lecture. "It sounds very good, but I want you to play the Schubert with a straight sound. You know, unfinished symphony." And I looked at him and I thought, oh, okay. I might have been vibrating a little bit. And it was hard for me actually to get the kind of quality that he wanted. And he says, "Okay, thank you very much." You know, I'd been playing, I don't know, I was trying to figure out what would be my best foot forward here. And I thought, well, I'd give them something they never heard before. But there was something he didn't like. And then they hired a principal, and then they had another opening, I think a year and a half, 2 years later. And I applied again. And I was told that there was no vacancy.
Wow.
Which I knew was not true. In any case, I was married then. My wife had gone to the summer festival of the Cleveland Orchestra. She knew John Mack. She called John Mack. She says, "You know, Mr. Mack, do you remember me? I'm bassoonist Lynette Pierce. Frank auditioned last time, and he realized that he was vibrating, and it was a bad decision." And that he learned his lesson, and he's really desperate to again.
So he learned his lesson. What do you steal a car, or use a little vibrato?
No, but anyway, what happened was months went by, and they were having auditions every so often. I knew about it because some of my friends were going. On a Friday afternoon, I get a telegram. Do you remember what those are?
How do you spell it?
A telegram is a yellow piece of paper, Western Union. It said, "Your audition for principal clarinet for the Cleveland Orchestra will be Monday morning at 10 o'clock. This was on a Friday afternoon. So great, okay, I'm going. You know, I got my ticket, my plane ticket. I showed up, I played. I walked out on stage. I think I was the second person that day. Mozart was sitting out there. I walk on stage. He gets up and heads for the door. He didn't want to hear me.
Oh, he remembered you from last time.
He remembered me. And the personnel manager goes over, grabs him by the arm, and to the chair. And so he's sitting there like this. So I play one excerpt, I play 2 excerpts, 3 excerpts. He had me play for about an hour. I played everything, and there was no list, no nothing. And I think the last thing I played was Rhapsody in Blue. And he came up on stage and said, "Could you do a tour with us, Mr. Cohen? Can you play a tour with us in the fall?" And I looked at him dumbfounded. I didn't know what to say. So I said, "Oh, do you mean as soloist?" I didn't know what to say. So he laughed. And then he said, "No, in New York." So there it was. That afternoon, his executive, the manager called me. "Mr. Mozart wants to sign you up." And that's how that went. So I figured he must have really liked me, and I learned something from that experience, because wanting to walk out and not listen to me again, and an hour later, he offers me the job. I talked to him about it a little bit later, after I was here, but he's not the kind of guy you chum around with and ask too personal questions. So I just counted my blessings. And when I joined the orchestra then, this was the Cleveland Orchestra that Zell passed on. I mean, to this day, I remember all those people that Zell trained one by one and really trained. He told people what he liked, what he didn't like. If he liked you, he encouraged you. If he didn't like you, he wrote in your music all the guidelines, and it was all in our music. And Mazel, of course, was, he inherited that. I mean, you know, all these historic players, Myron Bloom, John Mack, George Gosley, Raphael Julian, you know, one superstar after another. And when I go back and hear this recording, like of the Beethoven, did I talk to you about the Ninth Symphony?
Well, you said that's with Dochnani, right? Or did I get it wrong?
But it was all those same people.
Same people, yeah. Mm-hmm.
A lot of them, not quite. I mean, some of the personnel had changed, but you know, the way of blending, the way of voicing, you know, leading one voice to the other, and all the parts were meticulously marked. If you had 50 measures rest, he'd mark it with the phrases, you know, so it'd be like 8 bars, 12 bars, 8 bars, 12 bars. And so,
sorry, just to make these were Zell's markings or Mazel's markings?
Zell's markings,
Zell, wow.
And all the bowings and all that, to the way Zell had taught the orchestra. So it sounded like the orchestra I remember hearing as a kid in Carnegie Hall when I would listen to the Cleveland Orchestra. It was quite extra. That's when they, you know, I mean, they rose to world renown.
Frank, I had the opportunity later in his life to work with Mazel, and am I hearing it right? I mean, he was actually sort of submissive to, he was trying to carry on another person's tradition, and I mean, all this stuff was in your music, and he was encouraging that. He wasn't trying to sort of say, no, this is my gig now.
I don't think he was the type of personality that, you know, I'm just going to carry on the Zell tradition.
Right.
Like that. He's very strong-willed. But all, I mean, if you're trained to play well, it's like a clarinetist who does all the scales and thirds and fourths, and, you know, you're ready to do it, and then the conductor can do with you what he wants to or what she wants to. So he would tell us often, he said, look, I rely and trust on you consummately. We don't even need to rehearse that much. Just follow me. If you're all with me, it's going to be great. Because he knew the orchestra sounded good. You
know, one of your second clarinetists, Dan Gilbert, right? He came out and played with us not long ago, less than a year ago, and he said you had passed on something, and I really liked it. I hope every time I try to come off as very intelligent and add tidbits, I'm always corrected by all my guests. So feel free to chime in and say no. But he said, Mazel said, when you play soft, play loud. And when you play loud, play soft.
Well, no, actually, it's not quite. In the beginning, you know, we were recording everything, and, you know, they're all there somewhere, but people don't listen to them. So he said, when you're playing this Brahms, Frank, you know that. I don't know if I'm in the right key or not.
Okay.
He said, when you play that, he said, you know, get your beautiful sound, but I want you to play, instead of piano dolce, I want you to play, think of mezzo forte plus, plus, plus with a pianissimo quality.
Right.
And that was a great thing that he said. And then we went back to play, and he says, yeah, that's what he says, because in a way you have to float over the whole section, but it needs this incredible tenderness. And he didn't want it pianissimo so that you're hidden in the texture. He wanted you to play full out and floating and over the texture. And this is going back to Jessie Norman, this is what she could do. And so obviously I did it to his satisfaction at the time. But yes, that kind of thing he would ask me to do. And Dan's memory is good. In homage to Dan, who I thank for, you know, those years we had together, when I came here, I had Theodore Johnson was the second clarinetist. Ted, he's still alive. He's like 91. And I learned so much from him about actually deportment.
Mm.
Interesting story. We had a conductor. We were doing Francesca da Rimini with this.
That was pronunciation.
Very good.
But by the way, we need we got our techie boy here, Lorenzo, who we love, and he's oh no.
Oh, no, it's gone. It's his fault.
Oh, it's your
Oh,
fault. Yeah, and he just nodded. He's from Italy, and he said your pronunciation is not bad at all.
Oh, good. Well, we had a crazy conductor, and he wanted something, from me that I wasn't producing. So he says, clarinet, Mr. Cohen, bring me your clarinet at the intermission. So intermission comes, and I stand up to go backstage to see the conductor. And Ted Johnson, he grabs me by the arm. He says, don't ever take your instrument to the conductor's room.
Uh-huh.
So
Very good. Yeah.
I said, really? He said he told me to do it. He says, trust me. So I go back to the conductor's room, and he says, oh, monsieur, where's your clarinet?
French.
And I said, no, it's out there. And he says, no, you need your clarinet. So I said, listen, maestro, will you please sing it for me the way you'd like it? He says, no. I said, no, I beg you, please sing. So he starts. And he finished, and I said, oh my God, that was the most beautiful thing I ever heard. I said, I'm going to play it exactly like that. And he says, thank you so much. So we go back after the mission, and then he says, let's try the clarinet. So I play, and he goes with a big smile. He's like,
Great. Let's just go back. Who was your music director in Baltimore?
Sergio Commissiona.
Yeah. Great.
Who was very good, but I think he was a transplant from Eastern Europe, communism, and he didn't know what to make of America. Unions and musicians who had an opinion, but he was very good, and the orchestra sounded very good. It's just that it wasn't the life I had envisioned. So I was getting ready to go back to Germany with my then wife. Anyway, then the Cleveland job happened. I came here. I must say, in the middle of my tenure here, at that time there was more opportunity for solo clarinets in the U.S. And I thought, I could do this. And I started working with that in mind. And I called a few managements, and one of the managements came to hear me play Debussy Rhapsody with the Cleveland Orchestra and Carnegie Hall. This was Shaw concerts. I don't know if you ever heard of them.
Yeah, well known. Yeah.
They were very
yeah.
So he heard me play, and I forget the man's name. And he says, okay, Mr. Cohen, we'll start. And they put me in their artist lists and put all the material out. And then I started getting offers to play with orchestras in the U.S., like in Malibu, California, or Santa Barbara, or here, smaller orchestras. And I started to do this. In the meantime, I had two young kids at home. My wife, who was a professional musician, and my full schedule of teaching and Cleveland Orchestra. And I did a few solo appearances that year. And I decided, you know what, I don't have time for this. And I don't want to do that full time, but I think I'll just be happy with my life here because it was really a wonderful life. I'll do my soloing in Cleveland every year. I did more chamber music. Eventually, I started a chamber music festival with my daughter. I did a lot of summer festivals, and I had a very well-balanced life. So I made that attempt at a solo career in the States, and I got a management, but I felt like I didn't want to dissipate all my time so that that I couldn't do anything well enough, and that I didn't have to, I wanted to be serious about raising my children with my wife. So I wanted to spend that time when I had a week or 2 or 3 vacation.
Who were your, so Commissiona was the only music director in your short stay in Baltimore, right?
Yes.
And then other than Mazel, in your 40 years in Cleveland, who else were your music directors?
Dochnani
Mm-hmm.
and Boulez, was a visitor often. And,
Mm-hmm.
we recorded the Rhapsody together. That's one of my
Mm-hmm.
greatest memories. And Ashkenazi, we made many, many recordings with him. And then the present music director, Most, has been here, I don't know, for quite some time now.
Right.
But hearkening back to the Stakovsky advice and wisdom, I was really happiest when given, when doing my thing as a team player and being happy with it, because I am a good team player, but also being who I am personally. Like a chamber musician, you don't want to, if you play with the Guarneri Quartet or the Emerson Quartet, you don't want to be so intimidated by their fame that you come in and all you're trying to do is get the right notes and fit in. You want to be who you are and come to some sort of agreement and dynamic that works for everybody, like a family. I believe that, and this brings up another important point of my life as a musician. I want to feel in any context, whether I'm in an orchestra or teaching or in a chamber group, that this is family. We can be open and honest and work together and have our fireside chats and express, our disappointments, our excitements, our love, what we're trying to reach together, express together. And that's what I love about the music festival my daughter created. We have what we call, it's called Chamberfest. And we have what we call the Chamberhood. And the Chamberhood is my living room with all the musicians here, laughing and partying till 1 in the morning and rehearsing and shedding tears together and enjoying life together. This to me is the joy of music. And I've been very lucky to have the ability through my music to build larger and larger network of family and friends. When it doesn't seem like it's a family anymore, when it's imbalanced, when the kid can't come to the father or mother at dinner and say, you know what, that didn't feel good yesterday, the way you disciplined me, you weren't nice to me, then it's not, it doesn't work anymore. It's like imposing on your students your will. I don't want to do that. And I made that mistake. So I'm sure most of us who teach have done that on occasion. And perhaps I've done it too much. And for those of you I've done it, what I would love to do with in any musical situation, including teaching and chamber music orchestra, is invite everyone to be part of it as an equal. As a team where you walk on stage and you see people smiling and looking at each other and moving together. I mean, that's such a beautiful thing. I'm sure you've seen that. And when you see it, it's magic. Don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, how lucky are we? I mean, you talk about the international language and you go to places where you can't speak their language, they can't speak your language, and all of a sudden you see a reaction from them, and then that makes you play in a certain way, and then they get a reaction, and you have this incredible communication, I find.
Yeah.
And there's no other way that I can communicate in those ways and get it back from, thousands of strangers sitting next to each other that I've never met and might never meet again. It's wonderful. And then, of course, you're talking about relationships with your colleagues. I mean, that's terrific.
Yeah, I have a Dochnani story that just came to mind. Mm-hmm. So, his favorite words in rehearsal would be, careful, careful. He wanted everything to be just so. And then he might say, come on, risk something. And I once went to him, I said, Mr. Dochnani, how do you risk and be careful?
Thank you very much.
So we had a deal. he had a deal. He says, Frank, he says, I know, and I knew I can always rely on you when I look at you, and I look at you like that. I know you're going to do something. And he says, I use you, he says, believe it or not, to ignite the center, because it spreads. He says, if I encourage you, I know I'm saying careful all the time, but when I encourage you, he says, I know you're going to go for it. And he says that kind of attitude, from other players also spreads, rather than the careful watch it one. So he says, and I talk to him every so often. He called me on Easter.
Oh.
And just to catch up, and it was beautiful to hear from him. He says, it's funny how I used you as a catalyst. He says, did you ever feel like I used you? I said, no, but I love that you're telling me that, because I love that anyone in a group can be a catalyst, an energetic catalyst for others sitting around. You see this in groups, and it's a beautiful thing to observe, or in chamber music. It's electric. And it means everyone is equally participating, and all the barriers are down, the emotional barriers and the physical barriers. And we're inviting everyone to be who they are, and we love who they are. And if we think you need to give more of who you are, you'll be invited. That kind of atmosphere, it's a beautiful thing.
And it must be so incredible to play with your daughter.
Oh,
I mean, I remember she was about 8 years old the first time she came to Hong Kong, and I met her. And
that's right.
Now she's not much younger than you were then. I probably.
No, she's older than I was then.
Wow.
I think. But you bring up another wonderful thing about my life, as an orchestral player in Cleveland. So we went on tour, and as a very serious parent, I always wanted to bring my family along with me as much as I could. So first I brought my wife. Then when the kids got old enough, I brought Diana to Hong Kong. I think she was 10 years old.
Or maybe 8, or we'll have to ask her. I remember
she
we
was
went
very
hiking
young.
and
and I brought both of my children along. And, like I said, all I need is a half an hour before I have to leave for the bus to go to the concert. Otherwise, let's have a ball. They had to bring their instruments and their notebooks and take notes. That was incredible, father-child time. And they'll never forget it. And I won't either. Anyway, I distracted you again from what you were.
No, I mean, honestly, we're going well, and everything you said for me is very, very interesting. So we don't have time limits. We just go until it just naturally ends. So I'm good as long as you're good. Are you good, Frank?
I'm great.
Okay.
Any musical questions you want? Because I'm not talking a lot about clarinet.
No. There's other. Just listen. You promise. I'm going to guide this. I'll tell you when.
Okay. Apropos that last comment, I was never that interested in the clarinet. I fell in love with music, and that act of loving is what I want to bring with me to every place I go as a musician, or even a non-musician. That act of being and loving and meeting new people, and that experiential thing, and sharing my sounds with other people. If I start thinking clarinet, it boxes me in.
Well, of course. I mean, it's just your tool and anyone who's heard you understands that. First of all, you're mentioning students. Kai Wei is on here. He says hello. Emil Kudev. I mean, we got your students from all around the world here saying hello. We have someone. This is your chance. You don't have to if you want to. We have a mutual friend of ours, Paul Freed, who was your roommate at Juilliard, and he said he has stories on you. But I said you're the one with the mic today. So if you want to embarrass him, this is your moment. A wonderful flutist, Paul Freed, for the Boston Symphony early in Pittsburgh.
Paul, I'm going to tell a story. So here we were, like probably 1967 or something like that, living as roommates in New York City. We had an apartment, I think it was 102nd Street between Riverside Drive, West End. And beneath us lived a professor at Columbia, a psychology professor. And my practicing drove him crazy. So what he would do is he'd hear me practice, he'd go down to the buzzer, in the lobby, and he'd keep his finger on the buzzer for an hour. One day I'm walking down the street to Broadway. I think I was going to buy some music. And this guy who lived beneath me saw me, and he tackled me. He was going to kill me. He was going to kill me. Paul, who's very big, very strong, very passionate guy, he saw this happening. He grabbed this guy by the neck. I thought he was going to kill him. Thank you, Paul, because I think the guy would have killed him. I owe my life to Paul.
Wow.
We had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun together.
Beautiful. Yeah, he's definitely a character, as are you. So, so I mean, you mentioned students, you're mentioning your chamber music. So let's just talk about now. You've been retired how long?
From the orchestra.
From the orchestra.
Over
okay.
5 years.
So what's been going on for 5 years, and what are you doing today, and what are you doing? Well, today's a bad subject. What would you have been doing today and tomorrow?
Well, my daughter, asked me 10 years or 11 years ago, since I took my kids with me to everything, on tour, to summer music festivals with my late wife, who also participated. They saw what the music business was. They saw what festival life was like. My daughter asked me like 11 years ago, 10 years ago, Dad, we should start a festival, a music festival, because those were some of the most memorable experiences I had as a child. And I'm thinking, God, that sounds like a lot of work. And we talked a little more, and then I said to myself, your daughter is asking you to be her partner and create a music festival. How can you say no? So of course I said yes. She said, look, everyone in Cleveland loves you. We'll be able to raise the money. We're going to have an built-in audience, and it's going to be great. And she was, for the most part, right. We've built this thing, and I forgot your question.
That's good. Well, okay. So, how long have you actually had this festival?
Oh, so we've had the festival. It was supposed to start next Monday, 3-week festival. It's been going, this will be the 9th season.
Wow. No, I know you love it. I remember you've even contacted me a few times asking about various players and stuff like that. It's just your heart and soul.
We're bringing in some of the finest soloists and chamber musicians in the world to play with. You can imagine how that feels.
Yeah.
And they, most of them, I would say almost all of them say, Frank, Diana, this is one of the highlights of my year, because the feeling here, we have a cook, we feed everybody, we house them in this beautiful area, and we rehearse together, and we play great concerts to sold out audiences. They love it. They love it. They're part of this family that I was talking about before, and they feel it, and they let us know, can we come back? So we actually we've started a very minor sort of rotational idea, and have to tell people once in a while, can we put it off till next year? We want to just try this person as a young artist. And it's worked out magnificently well. And so that's taken up a lot of my life. We do we're part of the administrative and in the board of directors and the fundraising component. And actually, I invite you all to go to our Chamberfest YouTube channel. It's beautiful, Chamberfest Cleveland. And I'm also inviting everyone to tune into a mini festival we have that you can access if you go to my Facebook page or Chamberfest Facebook page. We're doing a series of broadcast concerts and interviews coming up starting on June 24th. That's the last. I won't plug it anymore.
No. We plug here. We plug here. Don't worry.
Back to when I retired. When I retired, a lot of people were inviting me to go here, to go there, classes, solo concerts, recitals, master classes. And in the beginning, I took everything. I took everything, and it was too much. I mean, I've worked my ass off for my whole life, and I wanna now a little bit enjoy some of the space. And I have a beautiful wife now who's very good at that. She's helping me enjoy being a little bit more calm and enjoying the space. And it's something I need to learn because I wasn't very good at that. I never had space. I was always busy. So I'm going forward. I'm playing. I practice every day. I'm going back to fundamentals that I should have been more serious about when I studied with Benny and Leon. Seriously.
Okay, well, Frank, keep on doing those fundamentals, and you might make it one day, man.
But that aspect of it, it's music is like a circle. You work hard to get somewhere, then you achieve some successes, and then later on you realize that you still haven't even completed the circle. You have the end in your vision, but this unfinished part, it's like dividing the line in half. If you divide the remaining distance of the circle in half, you never get to the end.
Right.
There's always that end point in sight. So there's always something new, or a new look at an old concept to look at. And that's the beautiful thing about life and music and friendship. And I feel very privileged that I've had this life that shows me that circle, these circles and these non-ending, continuing relationships with people. And my students, like, highway, hi, and these people from all over the world that we stay in touch. And when I see them, it's just a delight because we had beautiful times then, and we have beautiful times now.
Good.
Like you, Andy.
My pleasure, man.
How welcoming you were to me and Diana when she was 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah.
I'll never forget it. It was beautiful. And on that trip to Hong Kong, my daughter, you said you should go to the market, and see there, have all the food. So I took Diana to the market, and they're killing some of the animals right there.
Oh, this is such a bad subject, Frank.
And he says, Dad, I want to be a vegetarian from now on. And so that was it. Primarily, she and I have sort of lived that type of life. Anyway, I'm all over the place. Andy, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm going to rein you back in. Okay. Listen, so why don't we go right back to, look, you don't like looking yourself in the mirror, but there's some recordings of some, whether they're on YouTube. How about the Debussy recording? Do you like that one?
I like that one.
Okay, so I'm plugging for you now, Frank. Okay.
Can I tell you a minor story about Debussy?
Please do.
So it was done by Deutsche Grammophon in Severance Hall. And of course, I had recorded a lot with the orchestra. These guys show up, these German guys, they're sitting all in the box seats, come backstage. You said, Mr. Cohen, oh my God, it sounds beautiful. We can't wait for the recording. And I said, well, to be honest with you, I'm not looking forward to it because I've never heard myself back with a smile. And they said, you know what? That's very interesting you say that. And if that's true, they have not recorded you well. If we fail, you'll feel the same way. But if we succeed, and I'm hoping we do, you'll be able to look back at this with a smile and with pleasure. And you know what? They were right. They were so detail oriented. They wanted everything. And I didn't have to go to the control room, nothing. I didn't even go to the sessions where Boulez wanted me to go, that they were doing editing. I said, no, I don't want to listen, you do it. And they did it, and I was very happy with it.
Great. So Boulez, Deutsche Grammophon, Frank Cohen, Debussy, Cleveland Orchestra. Go get that one. And any other solos that you can stomach?
Mostly on private, in my private collection. And I don't really have a website that's functioning, but I hope to have that up sometime. I've said that for years, but I'd like to post some of my private recordings, which I really like.
Great.
That were done at festivals. I had no idea they were even recorded.
No, we look forward to it. But and for the orchestra, is Doch Nani Beethoven 9 and the Cleveland Orchestra?
Yeah, most of the documentary. I mean, he was very good with the orchestra. A lot of the Ashkenazi recordings of Strauss, Cohen poems, you know, Romeo and Juliet, Cinderella ballet, all this wonderful music that he was so good at. But no, I hope I'll update things. No, I didn't make a lot of recordings. I like the Brahms sonatas, but you know, when I listen now, that was such a long time ago. And as a musician, I feel like I've grown so much that, you know, this is interesting. I'm going to talk about this for 2 minutes. If you live to be an old enough musician, you can see your whole career, you know, look back and see what you produced when you were in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And over that time span, actually, not only have you changed, but the taste of the world has changed. Like if you go back and you listen to the violin soloists of the 30s, 40s, 50s, it sounds completely old-fashioned, doesn't it? And if they were alive today, if Heifetz were here, he'd probably go back and say, "Oh no, take this off. I don't want to listen to it." And this happens to you as you age as a performer. You listen, but now one of the few things I liked, and you reacted to it, I posted the prize winner's performance from the
Beautiful. Yes.
the Munich,
Yes.
and you wrote to me immediately, say, "What are you playing?"
Yeah. And he couldn't remember his equipment. I mean, as if you're responsible for making that beautiful sound instead of the mouthpiece of the reed. What were you thinking?
What I noticed was my naivete, but actually in a way it's starting to be appealing again. The naivete I had in my 20s and 30s. In some ways, I wish I could approach music, you know, without hearing all this other stuff, you know, because it clutters that innocence. You know, our best relationships, you know, in music and with people, they have that innocence, that open-heartedness that, you know, you don't have to think of. Look, I have to be careful. You know, you just do what comes naturally, and it feels so right.
I remember you talking about Mozart back in the day. You said when you're a kid, you just play. Mozart was a kid. You'd play his kind of music innocently, and you just play, oh, nice, da, 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 da. And then, you know, everyone starts telling you this is an important piece, and you start overanalyzing, you try this and that. And then when you get a little older, you go right back to how you did it when you were 16.
Yeah.
Like,
well, you know, it's true that after I won my first prize, and I realized that they're paying me the big bucks, you know, to play for a lot of people.
it's a good incentive.
I concentrated to make and my mom encouraged me. She says, make every phrase special, like make your hair stand up. So I would spend, you know, like 2 hours on, and I'd go over and over again and experiment with that, you know, not for good sound or intonation, but what am I really saying? Because it's so tender. And I spent hours on that at one period in my life, which I probably don't do anymore because I'm not at that time. But it was very, very valuable because you want every phrase to reach somebody. I heard something online the other day that was very helpful for me to hear. It was a comment by Daniil Trifonov, the great pianist. He said, it's very important not to practice with the same image in mind. Like if your image is not to do that over and over again. Play and then so that when you actually perform, there's not an expectation of this perfection that you were practicing for. That the expectation is you're going to present it at that moment the way you feel. Mm-hmm. So that, you know, because we all get stuck trying to get this perfect beginning, perfect, and I think what he said was very important because it frees you from trying to do the same thing over and over again. We all have been victims of trying to play the Mozart perfectly for so many years, and when you pick it up again, you're tired of it. You don't feel free. What do I do today? How do I play it today? Well, try today just, giving me many different versions, and having your expression. I'll use this as an analogy. So if you watch my face, all the little things you can do with your face. Do little things and change little things and have 10 variations on that. And then when you actually perform, improvise. How are you going to act it? Are you going to lift your eyebrows? Are you going to, have that sneaky little smile? That's going for freedom of expression. I think that is very valuable to go for in your practice. Otherwise, we have this thing, it's like packaged in a box. It looks perfect, never been used. And when you start your practice session, you start at that point, and it's how limiting that is. And playing in an orchestra can be that sometimes. Everyone's trying to get everything perfect. Break out.
Rushinoff was a huge fan of someone who would do a different performance of the same piece each night, completely different. And I had another teacher, I remember, just a theory teacher, and he said, tonight, play it your way, as you say, the way you feel, but play it so convincingly that the audience can't hear it any other way. And then
exactly.
tomorrow, play it the other way. But play it so convincingly the audience can't hear it any other way. This is the only way to play it. Third night, same thing.
I agree. And it's not that, we don't even have to try to play it differently on performance. Because in performance, if you let yourself go to the moment, you might even look at faces in the front row, and someone might be with their eyes closed. And that brings you where you need to be, or someone smiling, or someone leafing through the program, that might distract you, and you say, no, I need to be in this moment. I need to be. Every time I say something, it reminds me of something else I want to say.
Yeah, please, this is what it's all about, man.
I never felt like I was a good clarinetist, really, and I still don't. But I felt like my gift as a musician, if I had a gift, and I think it came from my mom, I would practice. My gift was how to bring your inside feeling at the moment and share it with your friends in the audience. I felt like I was more free to share through music than I was almost talking to people. I was never a very comfortable public speaker, but I could play something for you and say, Andy, I love you. I really do. The time we had yesterday, thank you so much. I feel like I had the gift to say that with my clarinet. And maybe that's why I had success. I don't think it's because I tongued as faster than everybody or had cleaner technique or a more beautiful sound or pristine this. Of course, we all want that, but that was never my motivational goal, because that brings me into that box. And as you get older, of course, you lose some of your ability. Your reflexes changed, your hearing, everything changes. So that, the tendency is to worry more about, is it good enough? Is it a high enough level? And so as you get older, you have to even be more risky and say, to hell with it, I don't care. Because if you're more and more careful and you're not playing as accurately, can you imagine what trap that is?
Well, it's funny because I did watch some of your classes in New Zealand, and this is exactly what you were saying. So you said, well, why did you play it like this? And someone say, well, I heard this on the recording, and you'd say, to hell with the recording, and then it's very Russian off, but So let's go there. I mean, we've covered your orchestral career, Munich solos, chamber music, your philosophies, which are really, really very touching, Frank. So but you're also a nurturing teacher, and it's always been an important part of your life. You've always had a very full studio of students, as far as I know. So, okay, well, other than the chamber music, now in your retirement, do you still have as big a studio, teaching-wise?
Not quite. And I actually, bringing up the fact that I did have many students along the way, with a lot, I learned actually how to be much healthier recently. Because, when you practice, we were talking about being in the box, I would never know at certain periods of my teaching, when to stop, when is enough, and okay, you did this, is a little out, there's a little out, like Dr. Nani saying, careful, watch it. You have to know when they play something that's not perfect, to let it be. Let it boil, let it simmer for another week or even month before you comment on it. And I made that kind of mistake too often for quite a while. Now, I don't want to go there anymore. I give you an idea, I let it go. You play with it, see how it develops. Because if you're too finicky with a student, you can kill them. It's never good enough. I bring it in. What the hell? It's never good enough for Mr. Cohen. So I think I've gotten much healthier that way, and I love the result of it. Actually, I do. Sometimes I want to go back with certain students and have that time again. And it's like friendships. The other day, Ted Johnson, who was the second clarinet here for when I came, we spoke on the phone, and he said, Frank, there was a time we didn't get along, wasn't there? And I said, yeah, you have a good memory. It was many, many years ago. He says, that wasn't good, was it? I said, no. And I said, Ted, the role I played in that, I really want to apologize and tell you how it happened. And he says, Frank, I'm really sorry too. And we decided we want, that we really loved that time together, and we want to carry on, feeling that we strayed off the path, and now we're back in sync, even though we're both much, much older. Yet we can really appreciate with a full smile those times we had together. I mean, it was very special. And we all go off the path, Even as a player, when you're trying to do extraordinary things, when I'm trying to sound like Jesse Norman's voice and trying to be louder than the trumpet, I mean, you have to risk something. And you make mistakes, and you get way off the path. But then a year or two or three later, you might say, wow, that was worth the risk, because look what I did now. Look what I did now, looking back. I've always been more of a risk taker. But not to really tick people off and make people miserable. I know I've done enough of that too. But, push envelopes to where the comfort, still there's enough comfort where you don't have a sever in the blood supply. You know what I mean? Keep the blood supply going. You can divert it a little bit. Be a heart and lung machine during that bypass, and then come back and have that full smile. But yes, as a musician, as a person, I've lived my life trying to open out and take chances with people to see how far I could go with what I wanted to say. How are you? I know. Look, you read it all.
I made it.
We have that in common. We have that in common.
Lorenzo, this was all his idea. It all started. We saw wonderful colleagues in Chicago Symphony, John Ye and Steve Williamson, interviewed by David Cooper, a friend of ours. He's the first horn player there. And I mentioned to Lorenzo, I said, those are really great interviews. He goes, I think you can do it. But he said, I'll help you with the techie under the condition that you don't dominate the conversations. Okay. Now he's held up. Okay, we started a little late, but he's held up his end of the bargain. I'm doing the best I can, Frank. So,
Oh,
don't-
He's doing well. He's doing really well. He's doing really well.
oh, that sexy voice, Lorenzo. I can't bear it.
well, I thought your little eye motions were a little flirtatious with him over there before, but I don't know.
How do you do that with your? How do you do that with your sound? You ever try it?
Oh, we're gonna.
A student did a lesson with me yesterday online, and they were playing the Stravinsky first movement. So it sounded good, So I said, how about doing a pantomime of it, forgetting the clarinet? And they weren't comfortable. So I stood up and I'm like, and then, I understand that. And then I said, even with your face, da, da. And then they played it. Having said that, the whole piece took on a life. It was beautiful. And I said, yeah, because, and this is my ultimate message, another ultimate message, is to show who you are through the music. I want to know who you are. If you go, then who you are is a person looking through the glass case at the score, like looking at the Mozart Concerto, thinking it's too sacred to handle, or the Bible or the Torah. You're allowed to handle it. You're allowed to make mistakes with it. And, but I need to know who you are. And if that's not who you are, if you are, then I think I'll get more deep message than what you're giving me the first time you play. I want you to be Marcel Marceau. Do you know the name?
Oh, yeah.
The great, or Charlie Chaplin. The face can say it all. Well, give a pantomime version of whatever piece you want to play, and then try to turn that into sounds. When you're trying to get everything perfect, it's almost impossible to do that. But we try. We try.
Great.
We get, like, you're a conductor, a guy that's very strict, right? He has definite opinions. Some people...
I've never worked with anyone like that. Tell me what it's like. Kidding.
No, but I'm sure you found your way to have your freedom in there. If not, you might have quit by now. Even though you like the income and you like... No, but seriously, because we all want to find that pleasure point where we can do the dance and have enough smile moments to sustain that kind of energy. Mm. But music, it's always important when I listen to someone, I want to feel what they're feeling. Because I've heard enough. Everything's perfect today. Everything. You go to competitions, you sit there on panels, with Carl Leister, Sabina Meyer, John Roussier, this one, that one, and you hear perfection. And when someone walks out and gives you something like that, people look at each other and they smile. Mm-hmm. Because yes, this is why we're doing what we're doing. Mm. It's not to get it all perfect. Who cares?
I remember asking you, even in orchestra auditions a million years ago, I said, what are you looking for? And you said, someone who makes the whole panel smile when they're done. You just know, yeah. And I remember that. I mean, I don't know, 30 years ago, and I'm thinking, wow, that, and now I understand a little bit what you're saying. So very quick, it's just been extraordinarily fantastic. It's already been 2 hours, Frank. But don't worry. I just want to So just basically, I've been asking everyone this, actually, I do want to ask you a little bit about the Munich competition, because not only we didn't really express this, but Frank was the only first prize winner for the Munich. I mean, from a span from when they started until they gave it up. 40
I
years?
think it was like for almost 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, half a century. The only first prize winner, there were a lot of winners, but top prize winners, of course, but he was the only first prize winner. And then you go back and you're a juror. And I'm just, and also I asked this to Ricardo, I mean, you've done orchestra auditions, obviously, successfully, and now you've been on how many panels? How, you know, what's the difference when you were 21, 22, 23, whatever it was, when you won Munich, and then as a mature artist listening,
Yeah.
listen in a different way than you thought?
Well, this is very, it's very interesting because, well, John remembers, and the other people I was on juries with. So you have points to award. And in Munich, a candidate, if he plays everything to your liking aesthetically and technically, and it's perfect, you can give him a 25. So there are 5 categories subdivided, and if they play perfectly, they get a 25. So there were times when I was in Munich where the top candidate was nowhere near 25 points, and I think you need 23 points to win first prize. And people were like 18, 17, you know, and also the Mozart Concerto was always the final round. So there were all these years after I won my prize, I mean, I did play Mozart for the final round. They changed the whole system. They put Mozart in the semi-final round. And the final round is a contemporary piece that is of your choice. And then, since then, and the people who are winning are wonderful, but now they're giving first prizes again. Because what would happen in the past, you'd have jurors from Switzerland, China, Japan, Korea, Russia, England, and France. They wouldn't agree on what Mozart should be like. And some of them just didn't like a performance that many others thought was pretty good. So nobody got the points high enough. So in my case, as the runner of the executive director, she said, that year, everybody liked you. There was no one that disliked you. And so you were able to keep that average. We've changed the system. You know, now the point tally is the same, but the Mozart has been moved to the third round.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I mean, that's actually very interesting practically. But I'm just wondering, as a seasoned artist on the jury, you know, are you listening in a different way than when you were playing at 22 or how old were you? You already said it, but when you won?
Yeah, I was 22.
Yeah, 22. And so I'm wondering, you know, what you were trying to do in the competition at 22, looking, you know, back 40 years later, do you look at it and say, yeah, you know, I was doing the right thing, I was trying to do the right thing, or
it's difficult to look back because my ears now have been sort of trained and prejudiced by years of being on juries and committees, and you know, and there are numbers of people that are trying out for something. So your ears, in some instances, have to be in elimination mode. How do you get rid of somebody?
Of course.
You know, then you're listening for, you know, too many mistakes, you know, bad intonation. So if someone's a great artist, you might eliminate them. Although if they're a great artist, they might have fixed these things too. But I find it hard now, in the first stages of a competition, to be open to someone's message. I want to hear a message. What happens now often is that there'll be 4 or 3 finalists that get through because they've been pristine, you know, and then they walk out for a final round, and now we're looking for a message. You know, they want to pick a world-class soloist for the Tchaikovsky first prize, and they're hearing 4 people who've prepared well, who are great and who sound good, but nobody who's moving you. You know, when Van Cliburn won that the first time during the Cold War, he must have moved them because they didn't want to give him a prize. You know, they hated Americans.
Yeah.
Yet he comes home he's the hero.
Yeah.
So we want someone, you know, to move us in the final rounds. In the beginning, you have to be, you know, you have to be very competent. You have to be in tune. You have to be in time. articulate, with enough artistry, so you're not turning off the jury. But then when you walk out there and, it's not competition anymore. Then, but if you're practicing to be a competition player, it's hard to take that suit off.
Right. Very good.
How do you get rid of the chains? You've been in the prison yard for 30 years, doing your time with the shack, with the weights around you. And then all of a sudden you're a free man, free woman. It's not easy. It's not easy. So with it, as your practice is going throughout the years, always keep that freedom in mind. And how do we get there? I have a student who was taking an audition, and he had an excerpt he had to play. He calls me up. He says, "Mr. Cohen, how do you play this?" And he says, let me play it for you. And he played it for me. I said, "No, go for it." And then I had my clarinet, and I was playing well then, and I demonstrated. And he said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." And then he called me later that day. He says, "I won the position."
Wow.
He said that made a big difference.
Huh.
I mean, because we can all be careful, but finally when you do it, especially if it's a style that requires that kind of energy and rawness. You don't want to take crazy risks in Mozart. No, it's not that. As my colleague John Mack would have said, or did say, it can't be wacko when it's Mozart. No wacko, but very beautiful. And John say to me, he says, when you play, I feel like I'm like a statue up there. He says, but somehow you found the right balance. I don't know if I did or not, but yes, some people are worried, because you have to take auditions and be perfect, and they're not going to like this, and you have the generic version, and but yes, not wacko, but something that shows you're the kind of person we want to play with for the next 20, 30, 40 years. The kind of musician we want to play with.
You probably answered. We're going to start closing it down a little bit. I usually am asking people what do they notice when they give master classes around the world. What are the kinds of things that you find as common problems or common things you would want to see more of? I'm not sure if you've been answering it actually in these examples and for what I've seen, but go ahead.
Well, what exists today, and this has been throughout the history of music making, the technical level has gone up and up and up and up. So if you hear the best players in New Zealand or Australia or Hong Kong or Taiwan or France, the best players sound incredible. There's nothing they can't do. But when you get 10 of the best players together, how are they different? We remarked on this. Everyone has a good sound, and in many cases, it sounds exactly the same. Most of us are playing on the same equipment, have had the same sort of teaching, and so I find that an issue. I want differences of personality, and I want interpretation. As my dear friend Leon Fleischer says, when you play, you need to be thoughtful in your practicing, and what are you giving us? Thoughtfulness. All of the experimentation you do in your practice, you're giving us some result, not always going for this idealized in a case, Madonna. You know what I mean? So no, all over the world, the level of playing is different. But like, for example, if you hear, you could pick any number of performers, but let's take Martin Frost, who he walks into a space, whatever you think of him, whether you love him, hate him, he takes over the space. The space becomes his. Now, you can't take an audition for the Berlin Philharmonic and play, take that kind of risk. But he plays classic music too. So you have to remember the context of the music you're playing, what period, but take over the space in very small ways. When you get in the room, let's say you're in the theater, right? And you put your arms on the chair, on the armrests, and the guy next to you is 350 pounds, and he's got his arms all over the armrest, and you feel like you're like. So I might, in a moment where he's relaxed, just try to move my arm a little bit in both directions. Make some space for yourself. If it's Mozart, make a little space for yourself. I don't mean like shove the 350-pound, guy out of the way, because what's going to happen is you won't be home later. But
unless Paul Fried is around to protect you, right?
Yeah. But you know what I mean. Within reason, make a little space for yourself. Because if you're just confined all the time, it's not, well, that wouldn't be fun for me. Some people might enjoy that sense of, being boxed in, and they know the restriction, and that's the way they play. And that's the way, they experience music. For me, it never worked. And in life, it doesn't work either. I love you as a friend, and John, and people, because we can be ourselves. Mm-hmm. And it's, no matter how much time we spend together, we pick up the phone, we hear that voice, and we get this big smile. Oh, wow. Here I am. I'm in my comfort zone, even before we've said anything. It's a beautiful thing in music, with people. It's a beautiful thing in life.
Great. Frank,
Andy,
we're drawing to a close. It was really wonderful. I mean, you held my attention. I want to say something. You can talk in a minute. Okay. I'm gonna get Lorenzo to yell at me, but I'm trying to get my space here for 2 or 3 minutes. Okay. So I just want to share my own learning experience, because I fully admit, when I'm doing these interviews, I'm keeping an eye who's here. Have I mentioned this? And sometimes I'm not listening as much as I should. I literally go back to the beginning and listen to all the interviews and take notes. Okay, I think, in my opinion, I mean, I'm probably making a bigger deal out of this than it is, but I really think this has grown on me, and this is more of a profound project rather than just having fun with friends for entertainment. I mean, there's really some good things being said here, and I really advise it. Start from the beginning to the end, and you'll be amazed. You'll probably leave with 2 or 3 things you connect with. A guy like what Frank said, you'll probably write down a dozen at least. And I just keep notes, and I look back to them, because a lot of and especially here, I'm looking forward to, I'm going to have pages, because it's really, really inspiring and interesting and entertaining. So I can't thank you enough. We've been keeping it a surprise who our next guest is always going to be till the next day, but I'm going to share, because she's a friend of Frank's, and we think we're changing the time. We're going to be 3 hours later, which shows the dedication of our friend Lorenzo. It's his birthday. It starts at midnight our time. He's renting a hotel room that night because he doesn't want to get back at 3 in the morning. And we think it's a very important person. It's the first woman to have a principal clarinet job in a major orchestra, Michelle Stakovsky, who's we've been liaising back and forth, and she's a tremendous woman. So I hope you all tune in then. Frank, what can I say? It's so great to connect with you. Every time I talk to you, I feel like I've been talking to Aristotle or Plato or someone like that.
or your plumber.
Listen, my plumber's pretty smart, man. Anyway, I can't thank you all enough for tuning in. Thanks for making this project really going well. And Frank, for a guy who was pretty nervous, you did pretty well, I have to say today. Oh, exceptionally well.
As my mom would say, you're a doll.
Okay, Frank, all the best. We'll be in touch hopefully sooner rather than later, man.
Okay.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.